The dust stung Lillian Riley's eyes as she crawled through the parched earth, her cracked lips desperately forming words that no one could hear. The merciless June sun of 1873 beat down on her back, her once beautiful blue dress now tattered and stained with blood, some her own, some belonging to the driver of the stagecoach who hadn't survived the attack. Above her, dark shapes cut lazy circles in the cloudless Texas sky, patient witnesses to what they assumed would be her final moments. Lillian had been traveling to Johnson City, Texas, to meet the man her father had arranged for her to marry, a cattle baron twice her age whom she'd never met. The stagecoach robbery wasn't supposed to end with bodies. The outlaws hadn't planned on the driver reaching for his shotgun, nor had Lillian anticipated the bullet that had grazed her thigh when she'd fled into the vast emptiness of the plains during the chaos. 3 days without water had left her delirious. Her parasol, once a fashionable accessory from her comfortable life in Boston, now served as her only walking stick as she dragged herself toward what she hoped was civilization. The wound on her thigh had stopped bleeding, but the pain radiated with each movement. The vultures, nature's patient undertakers, kept pace overhead. Samuel Driscoll saw the dark birds circling from 2 miles away. At 26, he'd spent enough time in these unforgiving lands to know what their presence meant. Either something was already dead, or something soon would be. He spurred his chestnut stallion faster across the plains. Samuel wasn't a man who believed in fate, but something pulled him toward those circling harbingers. The cattle could wait. As he crested a small rise, he spotted her, a splash of blue against the golden-brown landscape. From this distance, he couldn't tell if she was alive, but the vultures hadn't landed yet, which gave him hope. His horse kicked up clouds of dust as he raced toward the fallen figure. Lillian heard the thundering hoofbeats before she saw their source. With what little strength remained, she lifted her head. The silhouette of horse and rider wavered in the heat like a mirage, and she feared her mind was playing cruel tricks. But the hoofbeats grew louder, and the ground trembled beneath her palms. Samuel leapt from his horse before it had fully stopped, landing in a crouch beside the woman. Her face was sunburned and dirty, her lips cracked and bleeding, but even in this state he was struck by her beauty. "Miss, can you hear me?" He gently turned her over, cradling her head. Lillian's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises as blue as the endless Texas sky. "Water," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Samuel quickly uncorked his canteen. "Small sips," he cautioned, helping her drink. "Too much too fast will make you sick." The cool water on her parched lips felt like salvation. After a few careful swallows, Lillian found her voice again. "The stagecoach. They killed everyone." Samuel's eyes darkened as he scanned her body for injuries, noting the dried blood on her dress. "You're hurt." "My leg," she managed. "They shot at me when I ran." Samuel nodded grimly. "I need to get you to town. Can you hold on if I put you on my horse?" Lillian nodded weakly. The vultures still circled overhead, their patience wearing thin. Samuel glanced up at them with a defiant stare before lifting Lillian into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, dehydration having claimed what little reserves her slender frame possessed. "My name's Samuel Driscoll. Most folks call me Sam," he said as he carefully placed her atop his horse. "I've got a ranch about 5 miles from here." "Lillian Riley," she replied, her voice stronger after the water. "I was bound for Johnson City." "That's where we'll head," Samuel said, mounting behind her and securing her against his chest with one strong arm. "Doc Jenkins is there. He'll tend to that leg." As they rode, Samuel kept his canteen accessible, helping Lillian take small sips every few minutes. The vultures eventually dispersed, seeking easier prey elsewhere. Samuel felt Lillian's body gradually relax against him as they rode, her head occasionally lolling against his shoulder. He didn't mind. There was something about this woman that stirred a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. Johnson City came into view as the sun began its descent. The small but growing town served as a hub for the surrounding ranches and farms. Samuel guided his horse directly to Doc Jenkins' modest office at the edge of town, the white clapboard building standing in stark contrast to the dusty street. The doctor, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a perpetual furrow in his brow, answered Samuel's urgent knock. His experienced gaze quickly assessed Lillian. "Bring her in," he instructed, clearing space on his examination table. "What happened?" While Samuel explained what little he knew, the doctor began cleaning Lillian's wound. "You're lucky, Miss Riley," Jenkins said. "The bullet only grazed you. But this wound's infected and you're severely dehydrated." "Will she be all right?" Samuel asked, his hat in his hands, concern evident in his voice. The doctor nodded. "With proper care, yes, but she shouldn't be moved for at least a few days." He turned to Samuel. "The hotel's full with the cattle buyers in town. Any ideas?" Samuel didn't hesitate. "She can stay at my ranch. My housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, can help care for her." Lillian, more lucid now that her thirst had been somewhat quenched, tried to protest. "I couldn't impose. It's no imposition," Samuel insisted. "Besides, where else would you go? You said yourself the stagecoach was attacked. Your belongings are probably scattered across the plains by now." The reality of her situation hit Lillian fully for the first time. She was alone in a strange place with no money, no clothes save what she wore, and no way to contact her family back east. The man she'd been sent to marry wouldn't even know she was missing, as they'd never met. Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to say more. After Doc Jenkins finished treating her wound and provided medicine for the infection, Samuel carefully carried Lillian back to his horse. The town's curious eyes followed them, but Samuel paid them no mind. His focus remained solely on the woman whose life he'd saved, though he'd never think of it in such grand terms. Mrs. Winters, a plump widow in her 60s, gasped when Samuel arrived at his ranch house with Lillian. "Good heavens, Mr. Driscoll, what's happened?" "Stagecoach robbery," Samuel explained, carrying Lillian to the guest bedroom. "She needs rest and care. Doc Jenkins says she can't be moved for a few days." Mrs. Winters immediately took charge, shooing Samuel from the room so she could help Lillian out of her filthy dress and into a clean nightgown. The older woman clucked sympathetically as she washed away the dust and blood, applied fresh bandages to Lillian's thigh, and helped her into the soft bed. "There now, dear," Mrs. Winters said, smoothing Lillian's auburn hair from her forehead. "You're safe here. Mr. Driscoll is a good man." "I need to send word to my father in Boston," Lillian said, fighting to keep her eyes open as exhaustion claimed her. "He'll be expecting news of my arrival." "We'll sort all that out tomorrow," Mrs. Winters promised. "For now, you need sleep." And sleep she did for nearly 16 hours straight. When Lillian finally awoke, sunlight was streaming through the curtains. For a moment, she didn't recognize her surroundings, panic rising in her chest. Then the events of the previous day flooded back the Vultures, the cowboy, Samuel Driscoll. A soft knock at the door preceded Mrs. Winters' entrance with a tray of food. "Good morning, Miss Riley. Glad to see you're awake. How's that leg feeling?" Lillian shifted experimentally. "Better, I think." "Still sore?" Doc Jenkins said to expect that. He left some powders for the pain and to fight the infection. Mrs. Winters set the tray across Lillian's lap. "Eat up now. You need your strength." The simple meal of scrambled eggs, bacon, and biscuits with honey smelled heavenly. Lillian hadn't realized how hungry she was until that moment. "Is Mr. Driscoll here?" she asked between bites. "He's out with the cattle," Mrs. Winters replied, opening the curtains wider to let in more light. "Been gone since dawn. Said to tell you he'd look for your belongings when he rode out that way." Warmth spread through Lillian that had nothing to do with the hot tea she sipped. "That's very kind of him." "That's Samuel Driscoll for you," Mrs. Winters said with obvious affection. "Heart as big as Texas, though he'd never admit it." Later that afternoon, Samuel returned, dust-covered and weary, but carrying a small carpet bag. "Found this about a quarter-mile from where I found you," he said, placing it beside Lillian, who was now seated in a chair by the window. "Looks like they dumped what they didn't want. There are some clothes and a few other things." Lillian opened the bag with trembling hands, relieved to find a few of her dresses, undergarments, and a photograph of her parents. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've been so kind to a complete stranger." Samuel shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," Lillian said firmly, "not anyone. The stagecoach driver tried to help us and was killed for it, the other passengers." She trailed off, the memory still too fresh. "You risked your life coming to help me. Those men could have still been nearby." Samuel's expression darkened. "Did you get a good look at them? Sheriff Thompson should know." Lillian shook her head. "It happened so fast. 3 men, I think. One had a scar across his cheek." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Sounds like the Blackwell gang. They've been terrorizing stagecoaches for months." "I need to get word to my father," Lillian said, "and to Mr. Henderson in Johnson City. He was expecting me." "Henderson?" Samuel's expression changed subtly. "Thomas Henderson." Lillian nodded. "Yes, do you know him?" "Everyone around here knows Henderson," Samuel said, his tone carefully neutral. "I can send telegrams for you tomorrow when I ride into town." Over the next few days, Lillian's strength gradually returned. Mrs. Winters proved an excellent nurse and companion, sharing stories of the area and helping Lillian adapt to her temporary home. Samuel was often absent during daylight hours, tending to his ranch duties, but in the evenings, he joined Lillian on the porch, where they'd talk as the sun set over the rolling Texas hills. Lillian learned that Samuel had come to Texas after the war, using his savings to build his ranch from nothing. Now, at 26, he had a modest but successful operation with plans to expand. She found herself increasingly drawn to his quiet strength and innate kindness. For his part, Samuel discovered that Lillian was far more than just a pretty face from the East. She was intelligent, determined, and possessed a quiet courage that impressed him. The woman who'd crawled for miles with a bullet wound rather than surrender to death was no delicate flower, despite her refined manners. A week after her rescue, a telegram arrived from Boston. Mrs. Winters brought it to Lillian, who read it with mixed emotions. Her father expressed relief at her survival, but insisted she continue with the original planned marriage to Thomas Henderson. "Is everything all right?" Samuel asked that evening, finding Lillian on the porch, her expression troubled as she stared at the horizon. "My father wants me to proceed with my arrangement," she said carefully. "Now that I'm recovered enough to travel." Samuel was silent for a long moment. "Henderson is twice your age," he finally said. "Yes," Lillian acknowledged, "but the match would secure my family's financial future. My father's business has been struggling." "And what about your future?" Samuel asked quietly. "Does that count for nothing?" Lillian turned to face him, her blue eyes searching his. "I was raised to understand that marriage is often a practical arrangement, especially for women. Love is a luxury not everyone can afford." Samuel stepped closer, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "And is that what you believe?" "I don't know any more," Lillian admitted. "A week ago I accepted my fate without question." Now. She couldn't finish the thought, afraid of the feelings taking root in her heart. The next morning, Samuel drove Lillian into Johnson City in his wagon. The town was busier than when she'd first passed through, with cowboys and cattle buyers crowding the streets. Samuel helped Lillian down from the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. "I have some business at the bank," he said. "Will you be all right meeting Henderson on your own?" Lillian nodded, smoothing her dress nervously. "Yes, his office is just down the street, according to his telegram." Samuel hesitated, looking like he wanted to say something more, but ultimately just tipped his hat and headed toward the bank. Thomas Henderson's office was easy to find, the largest building on the main street, with Henderson Cattle Company painted in bold letters across the front. Lillian took a deep breath and entered. The man who greeted her was tall and imposing, his hair and beard more gray than brown. His eyes assessed her like he might evaluate a new heifer for his herd. "Miss Riley," he said, his voice booming in the quiet office. "I'm glad to see you've recovered from your ordeal. Your father spoke highly of your resilience." "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," Lillian replied, accepting his offered hand. "I apologize for the delay in my arrival." Henderson waved away her apology. "The important thing is you're here now. I've made arrangements for our wedding next Sunday." Lillian's heart sank at the matter-of-fact way he discussed their marriage. "So soon?" "No reason to wait," Henderson said, returning to his desk. "Your father and I have agreed to the terms. The sooner we make this official, the sooner we can begin our life together." As Henderson outlined his plans for their future, Lillian felt increasingly trapped. This man spoke of her as an acquisition, never once asking her opinion or desires. When he mentioned that they would leave immediately after the wedding for his ranch 50 miles away, Lillian thought of Samuel's kind eyes and gentle hands, and her heart ached. After leaving Henderson's office, Lillian wandered down the street, lost in thought. She found herself outside the sheriff's office and, on impulse, entered. If she was to live in this area, she should report what she knew of the stagecoach robbery. Sheriff Thompson, a weathered man with sharp eyes, listened intently to her account. "Blackwell gang, all right," he confirmed when she mentioned the man with the scar. "Been after them for months. They've hit 3 coaches in the last 2 months alone." "Will you catch them?" Lillian asked. The sheriff's expression was grim. "Eventually. Men like that get careless or someone talks. We'll get them." As Lillian left the sheriff's office, she nearly collided with Samuel, who was striding quickly down the boardwalk. "Lillian," he exclaimed, steadying her with his hands on her shoulders. "I was just looking for you." "How did your meeting with Henderson go?" Something in his expression made her hesitate. "He set the wedding for Sunday," she said quietly. Samuel's face fell, though he quickly masked it. "So soon?" "Yes," Lillian confirmed. "He seems eager to conclude the arrangement." "I'm sure he is," Samuel said, his tone uncharacteristically bitter. "Henderson wants what Henderson wants, and he's not used to waiting." Lillian studied his face. "You don't like him." "It's not my place to please Samuel," Lillian interrupted. "I value your opinion." "If there's something I should know." Samuel sighed heavily. "Henderson built his fortune by pushing smaller ranchers out of business. He's not above using underhanded tactics to get what he wants." He paused, then added, "including having his men frighten off homesteaders so he can buy their land cheap." The revelation chilled Lillian. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without catching him red-handed," Samuel replied. "Sheriff Thompson suspects the same, but Henderson is careful." They stood in silence for a moment, the bustle of the town continuing around them. "Would you walk with me?" Lillian asked suddenly. "I need to think, and I'd welcome the company." Samuel offered his arm, and they strolled toward the edge of town. The late morning sun was warm but not yet oppressive, and wildflowers dotted the grassy areas beyond the last buildings. "What will you do?" Samuel finally asked. Lillian sighed. "What can I do? My father has given his word. The contracts are signed. My family needs this connection." "But at what cost to you?" Samuel stopped walking and turned to face her. "Lillian, in the short time I've known you, I've seen your strength, your intelligence, your kindness. You deserve more than to be some rich man's trophy." His words stirred something deep within her. "Samuel, I know I have no right," he continued, his voice low and urgent. "I know we've only just met. But something happened the day I found you, when I saw those vultures circling, when I feared I might be too late. I've never been so scared in all my life." Lillian's heart raced. "Samuel, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I care for you, Lillian Riley. More than I should, more than makes any sense." His eyes held hers, vulnerable yet determined. "And the thought of you marrying Henderson makes me sick to my stomach." Lillian struggled to find words. This man had saved her life, had shown her kindness without expectation, had awakened feelings she hadn't known she was capable of experiencing. But her duty to her family weighed heavily. "I need time to think," she finally said. Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. I've said too much too soon." "No," Lillian touched his arm. "You've said exactly what I needed to hear, but this decision affects more than just me." They returned to town in thoughtful silence. As they approached Henderson's office, the man himself emerged, his expression darkening when he saw Lillian with Samuel. "Miss Riley," Henderson called, striding toward them. "I see you've been getting acquainted with the locals." "Mr. Driscoll saved my life," Lillian replied, straightening her spine. "I owe him a great deal." Henderson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Indeed. Well, I'm sure he has cattle to tend to. You and I have wedding details to discuss." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Miss Riley was just telling me about your upcoming nuptials. Congratulations." Henderson's hand came to rest possessively on Lillian's lower back. "Thank you, Driscoll. Though I hear congratulations might soon be in order for you as well. I understand the bank is calling in your loan." Samuel's expression remained neutral, but Lillian saw the flash of surprise in his eyes. "Business matters come and go, Henderson. I'll manage." "Of course you will," Henderson said with false sincerity. "Though if you find yourself in need of selling, I'm always in the market for more grazing land." The implication was clear, and Lillian felt a surge of anger. Before she could speak, Samuel tipped his hat. "If you'll excuse me," he said. "Miss Riley, I'll have Mrs. Winters prepare your things for when you're ready to move to Mr. Henderson's residence." With that, he turned and walked away, his shoulders rigid with suppressed emotion. Over the next few days, Lillian found herself torn between duty and desire. She moved into Johnson City's small hotel, unwilling to impose further on Samuel's hospitality now that her future was decided. Henderson visited daily, bringing gifts and discussing wedding plans without ever really asking for her input. 3 days before the wedding, a commotion in the street drew Lillian to her hotel window. A group of cowboys had ridden into town, trailing dust and tension. At their center was a bound man with a distinctive scar across his face. Lillian hurried downstairs and out onto the boardwalk, where a crowd had gathered. Sheriff Thompson was meeting the group, his deputy flanking him with a shotgun at the ready. "We caught him trying to rob the Henderson payroll wagon," one of the cowboys explained. "His partners got away, but we managed to wing this one." The sheriff nodded grimly. "Good work, boys. This is Jake Blackwell himself. Been wanting to have a word with him about some stagecoach robberies." Blackwell spat on the ground. "I ain't saying nothing without a lawyer." "You'll have your chance at a trial," the sheriff assured him, then spotted Lillian in the crowd. "Miss Riley, this might interest you. This is one of the men who attacked your stagecoach." All eyes turned to Lillian, who stepped forward, studying the captured outlaw. "Yes," she confirmed. "He's the one with the scar. I remember him clearly." Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "You're supposed to be dead. We shot you." "You tried," Lillian replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The sheriff's men led Blackwell away to the jail, and the crowd began to disperse. Lillian remained, her mind racing. Henderson's payroll wagon had been the target. Was it coincidence, or was Henderson somehow connected to these outlaws? Lost in thought, Lillian didn't notice Samuel approaching until he spoke. "You all right?" he asked softly. She turned, relief washing over her at the sight of him. "Yes, just shaken." "It's not every day you come face to face with the man who tried to kill you," Samuel acknowledged. "You were brave." "Samuel," Lillian said, lowering her voice, "the Blackwell gang was targeting Henderson's payroll." "Does that seem strange to you?" Samuel's expression grew thoughtful. "Now that you mention it, yes. The Blackwell gang usually hits stagecoaches, not payroll wagons. And how did they know the schedule? That information isn't public." A chill ran down Lillian's spine. What if Henderson is somehow involved? Samuel glanced around to ensure no one was listening. "That's a serious accusation. What are you thinking?" "I don't know exactly," Lillian admitted, "but something doesn't feel right. Henderson seemed too unsurprised when I told him about the robbery." "And now his payroll is a target." Samuel considered this. "It could be nothing, but it could also be worth mentioning to Sheriff Thompson." That evening, Lillian requested a private meeting with the sheriff, who listened intently to her concerns. "I've had my suspicions about Henderson for years," Thompson admitted after she finished. "But he's careful, never leaves evidence." "What if Blackwell talked?" Lillian suggested. "If there's a connection." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I'll question him again." "Meanwhile, Miss Riley, watch yourself. If Henderson is involved in something illegal and he suspects you're asking questions." The warning was clear. Lillian returned to her hotel room with a sense of unease that only grew when Henderson arrived an hour later, unannounced. "I heard about your encounter with Blackwell," he said without preamble. "You must have been frightened." "It was unsettling," Lillian replied carefully, studying his expression. "Though I'm curious why his gang would target your payroll wagon when they usually rob stagecoaches." Something flickered in Henderson's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or concern that she'd noticed the discrepancy. "Criminals are unpredictable," he said dismissively. "The important thing is he's been caught." Their conversation continued, but Lillian found herself analyzing every word, every expression. When Henderson kissed her hand in farewell, it took all her willpower not to wipe it clean the moment he turned away. The next morning, Lillian was awakened by urgent knocking. She opened her door to find Samuel, his expression grim. "Blackwell's dead," he said without preamble. "Found hanged in his cell this morning," Lillian gasped. "Suicide." "That's what it looks like," Samuel replied. "But the sheriff says Blackwell was searched thoroughly. He shouldn't have had anything to hang himself with." "Someone got to him," Lillian realized, her blood running cold. "To keep him quiet." Samuel nodded grimly. "Sheriff Thompson thinks so too. He's asking questions quietly." Throughout the day, tension hung over Johnson City like an approaching storm. Lillian tried to focus on final wedding preparations, but her heart wasn't in it. When Henderson visited that afternoon, she studied him with new eyes, noting the way he dismissed the news of Blackwell's death with barely concealed satisfaction. That evening, a knock at Lillian's door revealed Mrs. Winters, who had come into town for supplies. "I thought I'd check on you, dear," the older woman said, embracing Lillian warmly. "You look tired. Are you getting enough rest?" Lillian invited her in, grateful for the familiar face. "There's been so much happening," she confessed, then hesitated. "Mrs. Winters, what do you know about Mr. Henderson's business practices?" The housekeeper's expression grew serious. "Only what Mr. Driscoll has told me and what people whisper." She lowered her voice. "They say he's not above using force to get what he wants. Last year, the Jenkins family's farm mysteriously caught fire after they refused to sell to him." "And no one stops him?" Lillian asked, appalled. "Money buys a lot of silence," Mrs. Winters said sadly, "and fear keeps the rest quiet." After Mrs. Winters left, Lillian paced her room, increasingly certain that the man she was about to marry was not only corrupt but potentially dangerous. The wedding was just 2 days away. She needed to make a decision. A soft tap at her window startled her. Pulling back the curtain, she saw Samuel standing below, motioning for her to come down. Grabbing her shawl, Lillian hurried downstairs and out the hotel's side door. "What is it?" she asked, noting the urgency in his expression. "Sheriff Thompson found something," Samuel said, leading her away from the hotel toward the sheriff's office. "A witness saw someone enter the jail last night, someone who works for Henderson." Inside the sheriff's office, Thompson showed them a ledger he discovered in Blackwell's saddlebags. "These are payoffs," he explained. "Dates, amounts, initials of who was paid, and look at this entry from 2 months ago." He pointed to a line that read, "TH, $500 stagecoach route info." "Thomas Henderson," Lillian whispered, the final piece falling into place. "He's been selling information to the Blackwell gang. But why? He's already wealthy." "Greed knows no limits," the sheriff said grimly, "and Henderson's been expanding aggressively. My guess is he needed more cash than his legitimate business provided." "What happens now?" Samuel asked. "I need more evidence before I can move against someone as powerful as Henderson," Thompson admitted. "This ledger isn't enough by itself." Lillian straightened her shoulders, a plan forming in her mind. What if I could get him to confess? Both men turned to her in surprise. "No," Samuel said immediately. "It's too dangerous." "He trusts me," Lillian argued. "Or at least he doesn't see me as a threat if I can get him talking." The sheriff looked skeptical but intrigued. "It would be risky." "I can hide in the next room," Samuel suggested, reluctantly accepting that Lillian was determined. "If anything seems wrong, I'll intervene." The plan was set for the following morning. Lillian would invite Henderson to her hotel room to discuss a concerning discovery about their upcoming marriage. The sheriff would prepare legal documents in advance, ready to move if they secured a confession. That night, Lillian barely slept. Fear mingled with a strange exhilaration for the first time in her life. She was taking control of her own destiny. The next morning, Henderson arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, his expression curious. Samuel was already hidden in the adjoining room, the door cracked slightly to allow him to hear. "You sounded concerned in your note," Henderson said, taking the seat Lillian offered. "What's troubling you, my dear?" Lillian took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about the stagecoach robbery," she began. "It seems strange that the Blackwell gang knew exactly when and where to find us." Henderson's smile remained fixed, but his eyes hardened. "Coincidence, surely." "Perhaps," Lillian said, moving to pour tea with deliberately shaky hands. "But then I heard about Blackwell's death. And now there are rumors that someone saw one of your men at the jail that night." The cup in Henderson's hand stilled halfway to his lips. "People will gossip about anything in a small town." "Yes," Lillian agreed. "But then there's this." She withdrew a folded paper from her pocket, a copy of the ledger page the sheriff had found, which she placed on the table between them. Henderson glanced at it, his face paling slightly before he regained composure. "What is this supposed to be?" "It's a record of payments," Lillian said evenly. "Including one from TH for stagecoach route information, the very route I was traveling." "This proves nothing," Henderson snapped, pushing the paper away. "Perhaps not by itself," Lillian conceded, "but Blackwell might have talked eventually. Is that why he had to die?" Henderson stood abruptly, his facade cracking. "You understand nothing about business, girl. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for progress." "Sacrifices," Lillian echoed, her voice rising. "People died on that stagecoach. I nearly died." "An unfortunate complication," Henderson said dismissively. "Blackwell was supposed to simply take valuables, not create bodies." "But the driver was foolish enough to resist." Lillian's heart pounded, realizing he was actually confessing. "So you admit you worked with him. You provided information that led to those deaths." Henderson's expression turned ugly. "You think you're clever, don't you? Playing detective." He stepped toward her menacingly. "What exactly do you plan to do with these theories of yours?" Before Lillian could respond, the adjoining door burst open and Samuel stepped through, followed immediately by Sheriff Thompson and his deputy from the hallway door. "I think she plans to see justice done," Samuel said, his hand resting on his holstered revolver. Henderson whirled, his face contorting with rage. "This is entrapment. This is a confession to conspiracy in multiple murders," the sheriff corrected, producing handcuffs. "Thomas Henderson, you're under arrest." Henderson lunged toward Lillian, but Samuel was faster, stepping between them and restraining the older man until the sheriff could secure the handcuffs. "You'll regret this," Henderson snarled as he was led away. "All of you." When they were alone, Samuel turned to Lillian, his expression a mixture of admiration and lingering concern. "Are you all right?" Lillian nodded, still processing what had just happened. "I think so. I can't believe it worked." "You were incredible," Samuel said softly, taking her hands in his. "Brave beyond words." Lillian looked down at their joined hands, then back up to his eyes. "What happens now?" "Now," Samuel said with a small smile, "you're free." The realization washed over her like a wave. She was no longer bound to marry Henderson. Her father's arrangement was nullified by Henderson's criminal activities. For the first time since arriving in Texas, Lillian's future was truly her own to decide. In the days that followed, Johnson City buzzed with the scandal. Henderson's empire began to crumble as investigations revealed the full extent of his crimes, not just collaboration with the Blackwell gang, but land theft, intimidation, and even murder. More witnesses came forward once they knew he was behind bars. Lillian sent a detailed telegram to her father, explaining everything that had transpired. His response came 2 days later, full of concern for her safety, relief at her escape from such a marriage, and uncertainty about their family's financial future. Meanwhile, Lillian found herself spending more and more time with Samuel. They rode together across his ranch, walked along the river at sunset, and shared quiet dinners on his porch. With each passing day, her feelings for him deepened. 2 weeks after Henderson's arrest, Samuel took Lillian to a hilltop overlooking his ranch. The spring wildflowers were in full bloom, painting the landscape in vibrant blues, yellows, and purples. "I brought you here for a reason," Samuel said, his voice unusually nervous. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch. I come here to think, to dream about the future." Lillian smiled, touched by his willingness to share something so personal. "It's beautiful." "Lillian," Samuel began, taking her hands in his. "When I found you that day with the vultures circling overhead, I had no idea how completely you would change my life. These past weeks have been. I've never felt this way about anyone." Lillian's heart raced. "Samuel, I know it might seem fast," he continued, "but when you find something this rare, this precious, I think you have to be brave enough to reach for it." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Lillian Riley. I think I've loved you since the moment you opened those blue eyes and looked up at me from the dust." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I've known it for a while now, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself." Samuel dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Then would you consider staying here in Johnson City, not as my guest, but as my wife? I can't offer you the wealth that Henderson promised, but I swear I'll spend every day trying to make you happy." Lillian pulled him to his feet, her smile radiant through her tears. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, with all my heart." Their kiss was tender and full of promise, sealed with the Texas sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson behind them. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Johnson City. Most folks had already suspected the way things were heading and offered hearty congratulations. Mrs. Winters was particularly delighted, treating Lillian like the daughter she'd never had, as they prepared for a simple but meaningful wedding. Another telegram arrived from Boston, this time bringing unexpected news. Lillian's father had secured a new business partnership that would stabilize their family's finances. He gave his blessing to Lillian's marriage and promised to attend the wedding if they could wait until he could make arrangements to travel. 1 month later, under an arch of wildflowers in Samuel's front yard, Lillian and Samuel exchanged vows before the townsfolk of Johnson City and Lillian's father, who had arrived the previous day. Sheriff Thompson stood as Samuel's best man while Mrs. Winters dabbed happy tears throughout the ceremony. "I still can't believe you crawled for miles with a bullet wound," Samuel whispered as they shared their first dance as husband and wife. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." Lillian smiled up at him. "I had something to live for, even if I didn't know it yet." Over the years that followed, the Driscoll Ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Lillian's Eastern education and Samuel's practical knowledge proved a formidable combination. They expanded thoughtfully, treating their workers fairly and becoming respected figures in the community. 2 years after their wedding, Lillian gave birth to a son they named James after Samuel's father. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 3 years later. The children grew up strong and free, equally at home on horseback or with books. Sheriff Thompson eventually caught the remaining members of the Blackwell gang, bringing an end to the stagecoach robberies that had plagued the region. Thomas Henderson was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison. His empire divided and sold to smaller ranchers, including a significant portion to the Driscolls. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Lillian back to the spot where he had proposed. A small cabin now stood there, his anniversary gift to her, a retreat where she could write the stories she'd begun publishing in Eastern magazines. "You ever regret it?" he asked as they watched the sunset from the cabin's porch. "Staying here instead of returning east?" Lillian leaned against his shoulder, content in his embrace. "Never," she said firmly. "This is where I found myself, where I found you." Samuel kissed her forehead. "Do you remember what you said when I asked why you fought so hard to survive after the stagecoach attack?" "That I had something to live for, even if I didn't know it yet," Lillian recalled with a smile. "I think about that day often," Samuel admitted. "How different our lives would be if I hadn't seen those vultures circling." Lillian turned in his arms to face him. "But you did see them. And you reached me before they could land." She touched his cheek tenderly. "Some might call it coincidence. I call it destiny." Their lips met in a kiss as sweet and promising as their first, the Texas twilight settling around them like a blessing. In the distance, their ranch house glowed with welcoming light. Their children's laughter carried on the evening breeze a life built from the ashes of what might have been a tragedy. transformed instead into a love story as vast and enduring as the Texas sky above them.